So we're going to be reviewing a summary of the major milestones that have hit the last 2 years since the treasure chest was announced by Forrest to be recovered. And this is going to lay some of the foundation for the possibility of evidence that links to the final location being at 9 Mile Hole, and then also tying in some possible Ttotc hints, and then kind of wrapping up with what is the likelihood and what is the confidence level of 9 Mile Hole being the solution. Here we go. Okay, so walking through the sticky note solution version of 9 Mile Hole. WWWH, Fire Hole is warm water. The Fire Hole halt at Madison Junction. Canyon down is Madison Canyon. You're putting in or getting out of your car and into the water just below the parking lot at 9 Mile Hole. Home of Brown is the fishing honey hole. No place for the meek. You wade across the Madison. No paddle up your creek is the dry creek. Heavy loads and water high. Boulder and fishing hole, just the general area, I believe. If you've been wise and found the blaze, it's a tree that stands out. There's a couple different theories that we'll talk through today. And then you look quickly down and that's where the treasure chest is located. Aerial view of the location. You start Madison Junction and you go towards the west entrance of Yellowstone. And this is the aerial view of the 9 Mile Hole pullout, where you can see the car is parked. One car is parked. And a couple of delineating points is the top white box is where Fenn Rock is from Ttotc. And the actual location of the log that was identified with the GPS drop and the dry creek and home of Brown. These are all identified to just get your bearings straight about where we're talking as we walk through the presentation. So one of the most important things that I'm taking a really deep look at is not one piece or another piece or another piece of evidence that comes in, but the wide body of information that is coming in that is painting the picture and not contradictory of the 9 Mile Hole solution. It's kind of similar to what Forrest says, and he has some scrapbooks on the different spices and different recipes and the chili cook-off recipe. It's almost, and making of the cake, it's almost like you need all these ingredients to be able to come together and find the treasure. Just like that, we're doing really the same process when it comes to discovering the location without actually having the finder or Forrest saying it. So when we look at this body of evidence, and I'll wrap this up at the end of the presentation, is taking any one or two or three or four pieces. We can discount any one, but can we discard then all the larger whole because of any one particular data set? So if you aren't a believer that Sarah Davis was specifically, her specific jurisdiction's Yellowstone, that doesn't discount necessarily the Condor database or some of the other pieces of evidence. And where does those pieces of evidence come together and point? That's for you to decide, but that's what I keep in mind when I see each of these data points come in. So on June 6th, Forrest announced the treasure chest had been found, that the finder would like to remain anonymous, and there was a lot of issues that surrounded the final day of the treasure chest being discovered. So there was a lot of skepticism and a lot of controversy around the ending and the mystery around it. So going back to August of 2020, we have Forrest making a statement, several statements about the treasure chest being found in Wyoming. This is a sworn affidavit that was submitted to the courts that, in my opinion, puts my confidence level high that Wyoming was the state that the treasure chest was discovered. And this is an excerpt from that sworn statement from Forrest. Next, we had Dan Barbarisi's book, and Dan came out with the information that he had a Zoom meeting with the finder, and he actually got to go to Santa Fe, where he did get an inventory of the treasure chest. Then we get to the end of 2020 in December, and Jack is outed as the finder. His identity was going to be handed over, and was handed over after Forrest had passed, by the family's estate. So preemptively, Jack outed himself via Medium, and several statements from both the family and Outside Magazine reporter. And so now we have the identity by the end of 2020 of Jack Stoof being the finder of the Forrest Fenn Treasure and owner of the treasure chest. This is where pictures began to come out that raised the confidence level for many that Jack was indeed the finder. We have the name in early 2021. One of the searchers had identified Jack actually calling in to a gypsy's kiss. And this was convincing evidence that Jack was indeed a searcher, as he had called in. He was Jack from Philly, and that was the location that he was. And we were able to do some voice matching, and it was indeed Jack on the topic of cognitive bias. It was then discovered that Jack was a FenTuber. He had a YouTube channel, and he had one video up about cognitive bias, which was what he was discussing on the AGK show at that time. Again, solidifying that Jack was indeed in the chase before the find. So at the time that Jack came out, it was just about that time, a little bit after, that Odious Soul had revealed by kind of a Facebook slip, a response on Facebook, and then later came out with a video that she indeed had an email from Jack back in 2018 after his first boots on the ground. She said at the time that, and you can go and see this video on her channel, that it shows a 10-mile radius of where the treasure chest was found. And she had peace and closure from that. And she talked about it being a rectangle, and here's a screenshot from that video. And the Madison is about 10 miles in Wyoming, and she actually did a video June of 2020, so just this week, saying that she will not be sharing the email because a variety of reasons. You can go and see her statement. But she said she feels extremely confident. It is at 9 Mile Hole. This is over for her. So not saying that 9 Mile Hole, I would suspect, I feel very, very strong that Odious Soul would then believe that this 9 Mile Hole is within this 10-mile rectangle. That 10-mile rectangle would be Madison in Wyoming. It's actually about 10 miles. So just another piece of evidence that goes along in the journey of the different pieces that are coming together for 9 Mile Hole. So as Jack came out, he did decide to begin correspondence with many, many, many searchers, and a database was put together of all the different emails. One of the emails in particular that came from Jack to a searcher is he only really searched in one place. He came into the hunt in 2018. He did recon a few other areas, but really there was too much evidence otherwise, and he always focused on one place. He spent 25 days. So there is a YouTube video by Justin Fields that he makes a pretty compelling case of why Yellowstone is confirmed by the email and response that Jack gave. And he did confirm with Jack that he actually did present this email to the searcher. It was in fact him, and it was how he worded it. And he was really looking at three things. It was some information Jack received saying, does this invalidate how Jack was doing or conducting his search thought process? And giving mild evidence in favor of what Jack was doing, and then potentially revealing something significant about the solver location area. If you go through this video, and I encourage you all to do so, Yellowstone does fit that criteria. So something that Forrest had said that he thought could be in contradiction, and the premise or the thought process he used was, in Yellowstone, you don't go off trails, but Forrest did go off trails. So that would invalidate what Jack was doing, as if he thought it was in Yellowstone. It would be mild evidence in favor of what he's doing. It's still 2.2 million miles, but potentially really reveals something significant to the solver location, which is what Jack is not able or willing to do. I think he makes a good case here. Check it out and see if you come to the same conclusion. The next major breakthrough of evidence was some searchers had gotten together and analyzed Reddit. And there is a function where you can find deleted posts in the subforums on Reddit. And this particular searcher was able to tie one of the accounts called Condor 2 to Jonathan Stoof. And he did that in a variety of ways. Jack was quite famous for some remarks that he made about Sarah Palin's family, and those were in this database or this searcher from years ago. And also, Condor 2 was doing some promotional work to try to get some points from a credit card company. And if you clicked on it, it says this will credit Jonathan's account. In this database, it was probably the biggest breakthroughs of all of the postings there. And there was a pretty substantial database that was put together by Rimsbrock. The two that I think were of the utmost importance was Jack talked about his search area being my stretch of the Madison. Then a searcher had posted about, does anybody have any references to oil? And their particular solve was related to oil. And Jack had posted this picture of a tree and said, I guess you could see that this says oil on it. On the upper left of the tree is the O, the I is in the middle, and then the L is on the bottom. It's not as important to say, does that say oil or not? But Rudy Green, one of our searchers in the community, actually went out to 9 Mile Hole, and this particular tree is at 9 Mile Hole and matches exactly. So this is the first time that there is some independent evidence that is pretty compelling that would put Jack not only along the Madison, which some had already said for some time, but specifically at 9 Mile Hole. Some additional evidence that ties the Condor database to Jack is Condor 2 said, if you do find the treasure chest, leave it, get tax exemption status from Puerto Rico, move there, and then go back and get it. The searcher discovered that Jack did exactly that. He found the treasure chest, and in September, and in September 30th of 2019 he applied for tax exemption status. He actually moved there in December, and then he was granted that tax exemption status in January of 2020. Again, just taking a connection between the Condor database, what Jack we know actually did by government documentation. During this time, we had a couple of pictures of verification of both Jack and Forrest in an office where the initial meetings occurred. And we had Dan Barbarisi also in that same office. But we did have a searcher that was able to verify and sit in that same office, which was not Forrest Estate's attorney, rather Jack's attorney. So this was the time that I believe the confidence level was pretty high then, that Jack had his own attorney, and so it was really kind of painting a more full picture that some of the conspiracies were put to bed at that time. And most recently, the Department of Justice, Department of Interior, and Head Ranger of Yellowstone National Park intervened, trying and attempting to prohibit Jack from disclosing his where he found the treasure chest, and did discuss that there was a Zoom meeting in August of 2020 with Forrest, the attorneys, Jack, and Sarah Davis as the Yellowstone National Park Chief Ranger, solidifying to many, now that we had the Madison, many other pieces that it was indeed found in the park. The confidence level is raised by each of these pieces of evidence. When the response came from the Fenn estate, there's further evidence discussing the specific jurisdiction, because there was still some skepticism about whether Sarah Davis was representing other lands that were not in her specific jurisdiction. And two pieces of evidence came out. One was the specific jurisdiction wording. So the meeting that occurred between Sarah Davis and Jack and Forrest and subsequent intervention was related to Sarah Davis's specific jurisdiction, which is Yellowstone National Park. And further, there was specific terminology from the legal standpoint, which was the SERPA Act, which is only related to a national park. So the national park within Sarah Davis's specific jurisdiction is only one area, which would be Yellowstone National Park. At that time, relatively all in the same short time period, this is April and May of 2022, a new photo, Nook photo, emerged. And this came from a searcher named Jamie McCracken, who had received all the emails between Jack and Forrest in the discovery process. He posted this picture, and this is going to become important for the next step. But first we need to verify the validity of this picture, which was done in the court process. So this was posted on a forum by the person that was suing the Fenn estate and in probate. And he said it was a part of discovery, but we're going to get into why that actually is so by some evidence submitted in the court. Many have asked, why do you believe this information that was posted on Harry's website? The response that came from the estate to the McCracken claim specifically discusses this email and actually posts that picture as a part of its exhibit. Part of their defense is that McCracken is vowing to make public all of the discovery information in this trial matter. And they reference the posting that in Exhibit A that Mr. McCracken had posted on Harry's, and you can see the photos match identically. So this validates, at least in my mind, or the confidence level is much higher, that these are not doctored information. This is registered with the court, by in the estate's documentation. So this solidifies to me that this is a authentic photograph. With this picture, those that believed in 9 Mile Hole began scouring the forest on the other side of the Madison. The log was discovered and comparisons were made. A couple of those highlights are found here. There was a significant number of community members that analyzed this log. I'm only going to show one here, the animated GIF that actually shows the two pictures in an overlaid position. The fingerprint is what it is called, of the different notches, grooves, features of the tree and the tree, blaze tree behind it, have been done in length. I put together a pretty short video, but I think it was about 10 to 15 minutes of all the different analysis that's been done. My level of confidence is high enough. I think this overlay shows it's the same size, the same relatively the same features. These two pictures were over a 3-year time period. And all the accompanied information, like the blaze tree and other features, I am confident that these are the same trees. So using logic, you can take any of these data points or a few of them. None of them contradict 9 Mile Hole, and all support the 9 Mile Hole area as being where the Forrest Fenn treasure was located. Just taking a couple of those points: Odious Souls, 10-mile rectangle; Forrest, swearing under oath it was found in Wyoming; Jack, the Condor database, saying my stretch of the Madison, and the oil tree found at 9 Mile Hole; the Yellowstone Head Ranger discussing the Supra and the log that matches the 9 Mile Hole area. Any and all of those put together makes the confidence level higher for me of 9 Mile Hole. In the emails to searchers, Jack said, the solve is humble. He also said, don't dismiss the obvious. And finally he said, to solve the poem, you need to focus on where Forrest wanted to die, from Forrest's perspective. Many now believe that the double omegas is the actual location near 9 Mile Hole. You can see here on two different maps the omega, and one is the river and one is the road. Jack said that he had two slip-ups that he discovered from reporters. One, many believe, is from the California Sunday magazine, where Forrest is quoted in saying, hopefully at my last dying gasp, I will still go back to that place and die at my favorite ... He trailed off, and many believe that was his favorite fishing hole. So the second potential slip-up is actually undiscovered. A user by the name of Woody up on Dale's site had put, just after the find, 4 or 5 days after, when there was a discussion of the slip-ups, here is what he thought. Several years ago, I watched an interview with FF. What surprised me is in the background, hanging on his wall, were 2 separate maps that treasure hunters had developed and sent him on their solution. I took a picture of both maps and studied them. I asked myself, why would Forrest hang up those 2 maps when he received so many solutions? I knew then it was because they were both close to the treasure, but something was missing. When you compared the 2 maps, there was an area that was not covered. That area was one of Forrest's favorite places. It is the area between Barnes Hole and 9 Mile Hole on the Madison River, where there was lush meadows, pine trees, gorgeous mountain peaks, quake and aspens, and lots of animals. The elevation for Home of Brown is around 6,700 feet. Wow, I can't believe it. I should have kept my mouth quiet and went boots on the ground before I left to the Philippines. Be patient, Perry Mason is at work. If you have a reference to this, or if you happen to know who Woody is or a way to contact him, we'd love to see those 2 maps, because that could definitely be the other slip up. And it does fit 9 Mile Hole. Rumblings and Ramblings is a private set of stories that Forrest put out to some searchers. In Rumblings and Ramblings, he talks about 9 Mile Hole. They used to lock the gate to Yellowstone Park at 10 o'clock at night. No one could get in or out after that time, so Dad would take the car just inside the gate and park it so we could get up at 5 a.m. and go fishing before the gates opened. The Madison River in the park had 3 good fishing holes. The Slow Bend, 5 miles up, the 9 Mile Hole, yep, 9 Mile Hole, and the Water Hole, about 11 miles. These were our secret names, and the great fishing spots were also top secret. It was important that we beat my grandfather, old Charlie Simpson, to the fishing spot, especially since 9 Mile Hole only had room for one fisherman, as I've gone alone in there. During our visit in late 2021 to see Shiloh, he discussed how he had fished with his grandfather at 9 Mile Hole. So when looking at these upcoming pages and discussions and topics, it's going to be diving into the Thrill of the Chase book. And there's going to be several ways and methodologies to analyze Ttotc. One of the things that I particularly note is anytime we see in a chapter the words that relate specifically to the poem. So when you have words like wise, heavy, tired, warm, alone, those will draw some attention, and we can see if we can analyze those for some possible hints. The second is several of the chapters were published in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle in 2008, and there are some key differences in wordings, and in some cases included some poem words that weren't otherwise there when they were originally posted. So those are going to get some highlights and some attention in this analysis section. And then those areas that we're talking about also in relation to the pictures that are in the book, not the illustrations, but the pictures. And we are going to analyze parts of Ttotc in relation to each of the three of these methodologies. Fishing was so important to Forrest, and in the Flywater chapter, we can see the accompanied postmark. It says Madison River. So in the Flywater chapter, I could go visit my father and talk about our favorite fishing holes. But as I got older, I realized there were many moments to remember, like the time I sat under the tree on the Madison River and watched the osprey dive. Anytime in Ttotc that keywords from the poem are used in the book, I take note. My secret fishing hole. I can keep my secrets where? Is this 9 Mile Hole? Perhaps. 9 Mile Hole is specifically put in Ttotc with Forrest's father holding some fish at what we know as Fenn Rock. Paragraph was added to the Flywater chapter. The book now occupies a different shelf, closer to my view, for it holds some memories most dear and makes me know that moments such as those are fleet of foot indeed, and calls to make them all the more. It is well said that, quote, God subtracts from the allotted time of man those hours spent fishing. Does this point to a fishing solve and his special spot being fishing related? Perhaps. In looking for Lewis and Clark, Forrest added just outside of West Yellowstone. We already had the Madison River, but he added just outside of West Yellowstone, perhaps to give more context to the area. I think is the most important paragraph in Ttotc. There is one word changed, but it was published in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle. Rather than you, the word Peggy was added to this. This is out of the Flywater chapter. And when my tackle box is closed at last and the Candace hatch is gone, I will rest through all of time and space, pillowed down and scented in, with a smile that comes from remembering the special things that brought me to this final place, one of which was knowing Peggy was there somewhere waiting for me. So he talks about a tackle box and the final place, and a place he's been with his family and Peggy. It seems that the fishing solve is related to his final spot. So are there hints related specifically to where warm waters halt? Let's take a look. Again, in the Flywater chapter, we look at the differences between what was published in the Bozeman Chronicle and what was published in Ttotc. First, those great places. In the Bozeman Chronicle, it says on the fire hole. Would that have been too obvious? Forrest did remove on the fire hole from Ttotc, which were personal secrets. Again, anytime we see the keywords from the poem in Ttotc, I take note. So secret places like river bathing is best, Ojo Caliente. I always thought that space was mine alone. So the first stanza, could that alone be the fire hole? And the fire hole is the warm waters that Forrest believes where one water's halt would be Medicine Junction. Perhaps. So we're in tight focus with words that may be key. And so if you look at Teachers with Ropes, remember warm. Warm is in this chapter. And we also have some red lettering. Do not touch. All in big bold letters. I think that might be screaming out something important related to where warm waters halt. So let's look at the do not touch, where Forrest actually made a touch table, and let's look at Madison Junction's Information Center. You may not know that the Information Center has the only touch table exhibit at Yellowstone National Park. The only one in the whole park. Would the bright red lettering stand out to you in Ttotc? Perhaps.
I was a professional fishing guide when I was 13 years old.
In Texas?
No, in Yellowstone.
Oh.
West Yellowstone, Montana. And I ran a tackle shop all by myself. The guy that owned it was drunk all the time. So one summer I ran the tackle shop. I could make a gross of flies in a day and wait on customers at the same time. But, I had catgut leaders, tapered leaders. I made split bamboo fly rods. I knew wherever, I had a name for every fish in that country up there. There's Mary and Phyllis and Johnny, and I knew where all those were. And I'm an outdoors person. It wasn't so much fishing, it was being there. And I remember.
So Forrest says he names fish. And he named every fish growing up when he was fishing in Yellowstone as a fishing guide. That perhaps could be related to the solution at 9 Mile Hole. Jack tells us no place for the meek means you do need to wade over water. Forrest tells us that a blaze is anything that stands out, like the marking on the face of a horse. And if we think about lightning on a tree, it would be something that stands out. So it's just not a random tree, it's a specific tree that only a searcher knowing the poem would be able to decipher. Again, in looking for Lewis and Clark, the word hint was added. So this makes me, at least, focus on this area. And this is where we see why my horse was named Lightning was something I never figured out because he hardly had the power to get out of his own way. He also has a misspelling. He talks about Babe Ruth candy bars rather than Baby Ruth. Never figured that one out. And he also removed Parade Rest Ranch. Is that just so it doesn't focus in on that specific area? I'm not sure. But lightning is important, and I think a hint Let's look a little more at that. Well, there's a picture of lightning. So was Forrest saying when he said a blaze is something that stands out, like the marking on the head of his horse, lightning? So are we looking for the blaze that has lightning that has struck it? Could be. So looking at lightning again, and looking at the pictures, I'll give credit for the first one to Rudy, who said that untipped waiter. So does the waiter mean you need to get in waiters? Little wordplay there to go across the Madison. And then shout out to Cynthia Meacham, who thought the really important part of this area is actually where it is quoted, "I knew enough to be still and watch the trees," giving a subtle clue to lightning blaze being a tree. So these are a couple of new sentences that were in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle, or were not in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle, that are in Ttotc. So we want to focus on those, like Jack did. So here's the sentences. But Donnie got into a serious swivet and wouldn't speak to me for a while, except to say that our unfortunate adventure is ill-conceived, dumb thought out, and I was overrated like my horse. I think he even compared my intelligence unfavorably with that of the two of us, the horse, I mean. So he's really focusing on the horse. These are new sentences. Now, interestingly, if you remember back, Illinois' ghost, Rick, used to get "what's the word" from Forrest. One of the words that was given was swivet. That points to this paragraph as well, a new sentence and the pictures of lightning. We also see in the next paragraph, it used to be logic, and Forrest swapped that word out in Ttotc to wisdom. Since wise is in the book, and you're wise and found the blaze, do these sets of new words point us to the blaze, lightning? As you can see at the bottom of this page, just the top little portion, this is where the pictures, lightning, the blaze. So we see in the Totem Cafe, we see one edition, and we look at the words that are found within the poem. So the word tired, tiring, takes me to this passage. And we look in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle, and this particular sentence was added. I used to hide behind a tree and laugh. So again, are we focusing on a tree? And with the words that are related into the poem, it definitely could be possible. Looking back at the methodology of analyzing Ttotc, isn't it interesting all of the pages and chapters are the chapters that have poem words in them? So we just looked at Looking for Lewis and Clark, Totem Cafe Caper, Teachers with Ropes, and Flywater. And 3 of those 4 were published in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle. So going back to the log that was found by Rudy, let's look to see if there is a tree within a couple of feet that could stand out, or could be the blaze, or perhaps it's a rock. Let's check it out. Well, there it is, within about 2 feet of the log that was discovered that matches Jack's pictures, we find a damaged fallen tree. Let's see if we think it would be the blaze. It definitely had fallen. See what we can figure out happened and why it fell. It does suffer from bark beetles, and you can see by way of photographic evidence there is bark beetle boring holes found throughout the tree that had fallen. An example of bark beetle boring holes are at the bottom, and the top picture is the tree of what I believe is the blaze. Also, there is evidence of the boring beetles by way of these indentations. On the left is the picture of the blaze tree, and on the right is an example when you have bark beetles, what happens to trees. It's basically an exact match. Now let's look at another phenomenon. When lightning strikes a tree, it leaves a streak. Here's a couple of examples of trees that have had lightning hit them. Let's see if we can match anything on the tree blaze that we know of. You can see the white line on the right side of this tree. It goes all the way down the tree. And that matches what would happen if this tree was hit by lightning. Here's another view of the lightning streak from the tree blaze. Now the interesting part here is if this tree was upright, it'd be on the south side. Being on the south side, a searcher would need to know to go and look for it. So even though it would stand out, there is, and it gets you to an exact spot, it wouldn't be obvious and evident to anyone that's just stumbling across. It would actually have to be a searcher that would understand that portion of the poem. So which came first? The marking of the lightning of the blaze or the bark beetles? Well, in my opinion, the blaze was a streak from a lightning strike that actually made it stand out. From now looking at the hints in Ttotc, I think it's entirely possible. There's probably also a letter or something carved into the tree. A lightning strike injures a tree, and then the bark beetles will be attracted to it and attack it based on that. This fits both Forrest and Jack's information that they have given us, but let's look a little bit further as to why I say that. First, I had no knowledge of bark beetles, but bark beetles attack stressed trees. There are certain types of trees that they typically will attack, and most bark beetles prefer stressed and weakened trees. So this lends to the theory that the tree was struck first, it made it stand out, references in Ttotc, and then the bark beetles then attacked it because it was stressed and weak. Interestingly, if you research more into what the weakened trees of these boring insects, you see one specific area that these insects are attracted to are trees that have been hit by lightning, which then lets you give a logical conclusion. Lightning happened first, then the beetles happened second, and the tree fell due to the beetles. So I did scour the academic literature to see if bark beetles were found in this area of Yellowstone. And there was a study done in 1991 from Jim's Amon that said observations were made of the bark beetle infestation in 3 specific areas. Number 1, near the Madison River, approximately halfway between Madison Junction and West Yellowstone. Exact match. Now you could say because of the fires, did they go away? No, we see another study in 2010 that also talked about the beetles still being present even after the fires. So you can't get more exact than the specific quote here of near the Madison, approximately halfway between Madison Junction and West Yellowstone. So I believe that lightning struck first. Forrest then hid the treasure chest. There were references to lightning now discovered in Ttotc, so he embedded that in the stories that were not previously there. And then the bark beetles did infest the tree because it was stressed and already hit by lightning, and over time that is what made it fall. Looking at the aerial photograph above where we think the treasure was actually buried, and then the pictures that Jack gave that was just a couple feet away. The tree that I think is the one that stands out the most, if anyone is going to go to 9 Mile Hole and try to look for, it's the tree that has worn down. I think that is where Jack stood in the beginning and then sat and inventoried the chest, dug up the chest, went through the chest, took the pictures of the chest, and you can see that wear from either his hindside or his shoes wearing that. The bark is already gone, but wearing down that piece of wood. That really stands out more in just having some discussions with Rudy. This is more telltale than almost anything in that area. This tree log standing out for some not so obvious reasons, but it makes sense when you really start doing some analysis. Next exercise is going to be looking at what Jack tells us about the blaze that was damaged and see if it aligns, contradicts, confirms the blaze, the Rudy blaze is what I'm calling it. So Jack's words, this comes from an email database, and some of these come from Medium that was formed when Jack was corresponding with searchers. Here's what he said about the damaged blaze in Medium. I think my issue in 2018 was I didn't know what blaze I was looking for and I wasn't systematic enough. I fixed those before the 2019 search season, but the limiting factor after was deciding that because I couldn't find the blaze I was looking for, forces of nature had probably damaged or destroyed it at some point before I got there. My strategy on the trip when I found it was to try to imagine how the blaze could have been damaged, knowing what I know about the location, and to try to find that. But I didn't feel my chances were good. So he's talking about being systematic. So if you are searching through trees, you would need to be systematic. And then knowing the damage from that area. Could that be a fallen tree? Perhaps. So Jack said, to a searcher, I think it'd be very difficult to quote unquote read it as a blaze with the treasure no longer sitting there under it. I had been within 6 feet of it before without realizing it was the blaze. And I'm going to assume that Jack never thought that other pictures would be subpoenaed and coming out. That was before that happened. So I think with the pictures that we had, the very tightly focused pictures, this is absolutely the case. But it does not contradict the Rudy blaze pictures. The next is no. And he, Forrest, was somewhat surprised about the damaged blaze when I told him it had happened. Yes, all the other clues are recognizable out there at this point, the same as when he hit it, but none of them were as susceptible to damage as the blaze was. So something like Madison Junction is not really susceptible to damage. A canyon, not susceptible to damage, but and going through all the clues, the only one that is susceptible to damage would be a tree, if you believe the theory that that is the log and the tree just behind it is the tree. So here was a question and answer with a searcher that had emailed Jack. I have 2 questions concerning the final clue that you might entertain answering. We were absolutely certain of our search location, but it was still like searching for a needle in the haystack. My question is, 1, is there something in the poem or in the hints in the book that significantly narrows down the search area for the blaze once in the final area? Number 2, if the answer is yes, would you specify whether that information is in the poem or in the hints in the book? Thanks, Chris. The answer is, it depends on your definition of significantly. The poem directs you to a section of the forest in which to search for the blaze, but that is something you had to search for. Something like a needle in the haystack is accurate, but maybe slightly easier than that, or at least that was the design. So in this case, if you're going up the dry creek and you don't know, you can't see that tree because it's down, it seems to align with our theories at this point. So Jack does confirm there is a hint in the book regarding the blaze. And then he was asked the question, was the natural damage that the blaze suffered something that could occur slowly, like erosion, settling, or rather suddenly? Um, like, if not specifically the things Forrest outlined, mudslides, forest fires, earthquakes, or floods. And he said suddenly, so we know the tree fell suddenly. Was it was the analysis done with Jack at the time to know if it was a lightning strike or the Beetles, and how suddenly would that be? The tree definitely fell suddenly, so that seems to align. Question is, had the blaze not been damaged, do you believe you would have found the spot on your first trip in 2018? Or did you really need to know what blaze you were looking for in order to identify it, regardless of the condition of the blaze? Justin. The answer was, from Jack, that's tough to say because I wasn't tracking myself with GPS and being systematic enough in 2018. But my feeling when I first went there early in the search season 2019 was that it was an area of the forest I had never been in before, so probably not. If I had gone in that area, I probably would have needed some luck to even notice it, even without damage, because I didn't know what I was looking for. So when he's saying he's being systematic, it seems like to me there's quite a number of trees, and he's trying to be systematic in searching them. He went down to a GPS and marking logs or trees. I think 1,000 of them or 1,200 of them. There's some conjecture there, but or that evidence hasn't come out yet, I should say. So it seems to align with what we know of the broken blaze. So some additional words that came from Jack. The blaze, was clearly damaged by forces of nature. Now, does that include which forces of nature? No. But obviously from the pictures we have, I think that fits. The final one is, but I think the next phase, boots on the ground, rewarded a process-oriented approach, putting in the methodological work in the woods required to find the blaze. The research phase probably played more to my strengths, so I had to work harder at creating a good boots on the ground approach to actually find the thing. I was thrown for an additional curveball when I realized the blaze had probably been damaged by natural forces. So again, which forces, which brought it down, I think aligns. But again, we have some nuances here that are pretty interesting. Some more words from Jack on the damaged blaze. The fake blaze was less than 1,000 feet from where I eventually found the treasure. And that's not even half of that story. So the fake blaze, from where we believe, and there is some conjecture here of what Cynthia posted as the rock with the bones and the shovel, is 1,000 feet, a little bit less than 1,000 feet from this particular Rudy log. Question: did the damage to the blaze affect the look quickly down clue? Answer: I think the damage didn't have a major effect on that part because you're still looking just directly down, 2 feet down, whether the tree is upright or it's a stump. I think that fits. Not a sort of thing that would grow back into a blaze. So once the tree is down, it's not going to be able to go back. So that fits as well. I'm sure it's all still there, but the extent of the damage means it's very difficult to read as a blaze with no treasure there. That seems to align with a downed tree. The blaze was recognizable upon close inspection, but it was very damaged. So the blaze portion was at close inspection, and I think it took Rudy some time as well. So due to the damage, due to the fallen part of the tree. You can see by the review of this evidence, the information that came from Jack. Nothing contradicts. There is some an interesting nuance of, was Jack aware of the lightning strike? Was he aware of lightning, the blaze? Was he aware of the beetle? We're not sure. He's not able to talk. He's not able to speak to it. So that's the only mystery I think here. Other than that, all the words that Jack has given has aligned, and even would, I'd say not contradict, but even aligns with the log that was found and the broken blaze. So one thing to remember too is this area did have full solutions by many searchers. A lot of people are saying it's just becoming popular now, or there's no way you can interpret the poem to the actual location of 9 Mile Hole. And though it's becoming more popular with other evidence, we have our greatest example is up on Thor. We have a searcher by the name Vertigo that we have a pinned sticky thread now, but everything but the blaze at the Madison 9 Mile Hole solve. And he put this out um, well before Jack and a lot of this evidence had come out. It was pretty significant, very thorough. Must Listen Good, Rudy, and a few others also weighed in. And this is a search area that Diggin' Gypsy and a few others had been searching for some time. So the notion that 9 Mile Hole is not possible by just interpretation of the poem, it's just conjecture at this point. There was quite a few searchers, but the most thorough, which has almost 34,000 views and 750 responses, is definitely a very thorough analysis of each step of the 9 clues, except for the blaze, as Vertigo had said. So at this point, I had a recent discussion with the searcher of, with the totality of all the evidence, this really does exclude all other locations but 9 Mile Hole. I don't know if there's any other areas that you look at and you take all of Jack's, all of Forrest's statements. Would it exclude every other location? I have just not seen any presented or discussed anywhere that align with all the body of evidence that we have. So if we look at some searchers are adamant that the treasure is not in Wyoming, was not found in Wyoming. I exclude that based on the sworn affidavit from Forrest. So if you take the evidence that we have, Ttotc, the statements from Forrest and the statements from Jack, it really does lend to a higher confidence level that most of the other areas are excluded from possibilities as at high of a confidence level. I may be wrong since I don't review solves at a significant level anymore, but it certainly seems to be the case. So as previously stated, it's not one piece of evidence, it's not one piece of the puzzle, but it's a lot of these pieces coming together. Jack being on AGK, and we actually hear his voice. Jack having a YouTube channel about the chase from years ago. The Condor discussing being on the Madison. Jack posting on Reddit the oil tree, and that tree is found at 9 Mile Hole. Rudy finding the log at 9 Mile Hole. Greg getting a picture in the lawyer's office, not Forrest's attorney, but Jack's attorney. Yellowstone National Park intervening, finding out that Yellowstone National Park met with Jack and Forrest in August of 2020. This now famous log having a lightning strike on it. Shannon's rectangle, the 10-mile rectangle. The SERPA in the court documents referring only to national park land. Davis, with the wording of specific jurisdiction of Davis's, is where the treasure chest was found. The bark beetles, the evidence of the bark beetles. The Bozeman stories and comparing them to Ttotc, where we see things like lightning, the name lightning, and the blaze, possibly. Seeing rumblings and ramblings in 9 Mile Hole discussed. Shiloh saying he fished at 9 Mile Hole with his grandfather. Madison Junction having the only touch table in the entire of any of the Yellowstone information centers. And Forrest on video or on audio saying he names fish. Now, any of these do not build a story, but all of these together start to build the possibility of 9 Mile Hole. All the pieces are not in. All the pieces are not there. And I don't think they ever will be with the constraints that we seem to be having, which seems impossible. Yellowstone intervening, Jack not testifying. We would have had so many more answers. But I do think we will one day. Thanks for listening. And this is like a PS of this presentation. Shiloh gives us handmade lures from 3 generations of Fenns for WSOF this year. Do you think that's a connection? Possibly.